Salam, I'm Tusem, and thanks for tuning into the Think Work podcast. Last week, we talked about something totally different. I talked about my 5 learnings in my career, my first corporate job. And at the end of the episode, I told you I'm gonna talk about someone. So as you already know, on the Think Work podcast, we talk about role models, most of it. We talk about technology, psychology, entrepreneurship, philosophy, and so many things. Actually, whatever interests me, I'm just trying to cover it here on the Think Work podcast. And for this week, we're gonna talk about a scholar, metaphysicist, historian, politician, and most of everything, one of the greatest Sufi of all time. I think for this generation, this person is known by the famous Turkish series Diriliş Ertuğrul. We're gonna talk about Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi. The series was a hit in Turkey, and not only in Turkey actually, in many Arab countries. Ibn Arabi has a special place in Turkish people's heart because 15 years of his lifetime was spent on Anatolian soil. He was there mentoring Selçuklu Şehzades. He contributed to establishment of the Ottoman Empire. Before I start, I want to quickly say that I don't speak Arabic and I'm gonna do my best to pronounce every Arabic word, every Arabic name. So please bear with me with this one. So during the time of the Ottoman Empire, his teachings were still highly followed and researched in institutions. The Anatolian soil is literally blended with visions and inspirations. His full name is Abu Abdullah Muhammad Ibn Arabi al-Ta'i al-Hatimi. He's also called Sheikh al-Akbar, the greatest master. Most of us know him by the name Sheikh al-Akbar or Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi. Muhyiddin means the reviver of the religion. So what Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi makes really special is the fact that he came from the West. He was born in Spain, in Murcia, to be more specific. And therefore, his teachings are spread around the world. Ibn Arabi's philosophy is today still being taught in many universities, and many academic articles are still published based on his work. There are even organizations such as the Ibn Arabi Society, which many academics and scholars from all around the world are a part of. So do I know Ibn Arabi also from the Turkish series? I think I knew him before the Turkish series. So since my childhood, I always had a huge interest in Muslim scientists. And as a kid, I went to the Museum of History of Science and Technology in Islam in Istanbul. And for those who ever have been in Istanbul or planning a trip to Istanbul, it is right in the Gülhane Park next to the Topkapı Palace. I think it's a must visit for everyone interested in science. So whenever I'm talking about a person on this podcast, I will start with their childhood and family, like the close circle. And then slowly I will expand to his environment or maybe like the political situation in that area. And then I will go to his visions, contributions, and finally their death. So the persons I chose to talk about on the Think Work podcast are really selected carefully by myself. And most of the time, the influences of these persons doesn't stop after their death. So if you listen to the episode about Fatima al-Fihri, I think that was the first episode. That was the case for her. After her death, because she established the first degree granting institution. So starting from that day till today, many students in the world are benefiting from that knowledge. And for Ibn Arabi, that was also the case. So let's travel to the 12th century Spain so I can tell you the story of Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi. Ibn Arabi was born in the year 1165 in Murcia. He was born into an aristocratic family, a factor that greatly shaped his early experiences. His father had close ties with the government's leader and was friends with another well-known philosopher of the time, Ibn Rushd. His mother was also educated, and his uncles had professions such as jurists and scholars. So from an early age, Ibn Arabi was exposed to a world of intellectual pursuits and spiritual exploration. At just 8 years old, Ibn Arabi's quest for knowledge led him to the city of Seville. Seville was newly ruled by the Almohad Empire. The ruler was mesmerized by science, astronomy, philosophy, poetry, and medicine. So what he did was gathering many thinkers and philosophers around him, such as Ibn Rushd, Ibn Tufayl, and Ibn Zur, so he can actually flourish these disciplines in the city Seville. Seville was a city where Islamic, Jewish, and Christian communities came together and went to the same school. On every corner in the city, intellectuals' conversation took place, the marketplace, the bathhouse, everywhere. Seville was a city where people were all about knowledge and education. Starting with Quran and Hadith, which are the practices or the sayings of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He got his certification at 18 years old. And during his teenage years, he also went many times into muraqaba, aka observation. This practice is not something really simple. It's not just observation. It has especially spiritual meaning. But the fact that a teenager did this for 14 months is actually mind-blowing. So muraqaba is practice when one turns to his heart and reflect. It's a Sufi tradition. And by practicing muraqaba, Ibn Arabi was able to mature faster in his spiritual journey, Sayri Suluk, than his peers. And during these muraqaba sessions, Ibn Arabi says he was able to benefit from many saints. And this solid foundation in his youth later became instrumental in his groundbreaking philosophical insights. As you already heard, I'm dropping here and there some Sufi terms in case you are interested so you can look it up. In one of his books, Ibn Arabi tells us that Ibn Rushd, Averroes, was thankful to Allah that he was able to live in a time when he saw someone go into isolation in muraqaba without prior knowledge or reading and yet come out completely different, completely transformed and exceeded in his spiritual journey at this young age. In some sources, it is said that Ibn Arabi had not even a beard or a mustache. Ibn Rushd was quite impressed by the intelligence of this young man Ibn Arabi was. So at 26 years old, he started traveling. He was a real traveler. He went from city to city. He saw every aspect of the humanity, every culture and every religion. He went from Algeciras, from Morocco to Tunisia. Sometimes he went back to Seville. He stayed for almost 4 years in Morocco, where he also got a spiritual sign, but we'll come into that later. Overall, he spent 35 years of his lifetime in the West. While he was staying for 4 years in Fez, he met his friend that will accompany him for 24 years. Abdullah Badr al-Habashi. 24 years? That's crazy. I think this is very interesting. For 24 years, Abdullah Badr al-Habashi will accompany him in almost all of his travels. I immediately think about this quote from Omar al-Khattab. To summarize, if you want to get to know someone, there are 3 ways. You can get to know someone if that person is your neighbor, because you actually live together. The second one is doing business with that person, so you can see if he's righteous, if he has justice. The third one is traveling with that person to see whether they have a good character. When times are hard, how will that person react? So these 3 things are the ways, according to Omar al-Khattab, to know someone. Traveling for 24 years with someone, it's also mind-blowing because we know traveling is nice. You get to know new places, new things, but it's also stressful. And in stress situations, we tend to be like more sensitive. And especially when you are in a group, it's not always easy. Being able to travel for 24 years, I think at the end of that 24 years, you'll be like as good as brothers or sisters. So he went to other cities in Spain like Granada, Cordoba. As I said, while he was staying in Morocco for 4 years, Ibn Arabi says he received a spiritual sign to start distribute his knowledge, but not to everyone, only for those who are worthy. That's very interesting. So after this sign, he went to Palestine to visit the holy city Al-Quds, Jerusalem. He visits Masjid al-Aqsa and then continues his pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina. So while he was talking about Palestine a little bit, I can't stop the urge to say how I feel truly lucky and privileged to visit Al-Aqsa some time ago. I have never in my life tasted such a peace in my entire life. I was like happy but sad at the same time. And for everyone that have the right documents and have the opportunity, please add Palestine, Jerusalem into your pilgrimage route. And may everyone that dreams of seeing Al-Qudus with their own eyes be gifted with a mini Umrah to Palestine, inshallah. So let's continue. While Ibn Arabi was also in Palestine, he visited also the village Al-Halil to visit Ibrahim alayhi salam's grave. The history of the place, the mosque where Ibrahim alayhi salam's grave is really sad. Besides many cities, I also went to Al-Halil, and it was one of the most heartbreaking visits I ever did to a place. Al-Halil is currently under Israeli military guard, thus the city was literally isolated with fences and a lot of security checkpoints. So I'll post some pics on Instagram if you're interested. So in 1994, it was also strictly controlled by Israeli army. 10 officers, to be more specific, were controlling the village. The Ramadan of 1994 was, by coincidence, overlapped by the Jewish holiday Purim. So as Muslims do daily, they went into the mosque to practice their morning prayer around 5 a.m. So some say there were approximately 800 Muslims, but when I went to Ibrahimi Mosque, I couldn't really understand how 800 persons will fit in the mosque, but that has a reason. Let me explain. So while Muslims were practicing their morning prayer, an American Jew extremist, a terrorist, Baruch Goldstein, went into the mosque with his assault rifle and killed 29 Muslims and injuring 125 Muslims. A lot more things happened that day, but to summarize, it was shown into media that this terrorist was mentally ill and the case was really shoved under the carpet. So after this attack, the mosque was closed for 9 months for maintenance. When it was opened again, Muslims couldn't believe their eyes. The biggest part of the Ibrahimi Mosque was converted into a synagogue, so only one of the entrance doors were available for Muslims. So as I said, if you ever go to Palestine, at Al-Halil also to your visits as well, if you are able to go, of course. Okay, well, I didn't expect to tell all of this, but I think while I was talking about Palestine, I thought this was a good moment to tell the story of Ibrahimi Mosque. So let's go back to the story of Ibn Arabi. So as I mentioned previously, Ibn Arabi got the spiritual sign in Fez, Morocco, and started his pilgrimage. He visited Palestine, but then continued his journey by foot to the holy city Mecca and Medina. He went by foot from Jerusalem to Mecca and Medina. So he did this journey over 1 year. Why did it take 1 year? So Ibn Arabi was a person that just not go straight to the destination. He was actively also seeking places where he can gain knowledge and where he can find books that he can read. So while he was traveling, he went to many communities, many scholars, and attended their lectures to benefit from them. So wherever he goes, the inhabitants of the village will always gather around him to benefit from his knowledge. Ibn Arabi's pilgrimage to Mecca is a turning point for him. As he stepped foot in the holy city, he embarked on a path of spiritual exploration. It was during this time he started writing his magnum opus, his great work, aka Futuhat Mekkiyah, a collection of profound wisdom and insight that would span over 2 decades. And it was not just one book, it was a work of 37 volumes. Futuhat Mekkiyah translates to Meccan openings, and over the course of 23 years, Ibn Arabi diligently penned down his thoughts, bridging the gap between mystical and the intellectual realms. But I think also I have to mention that Ibn Arabi's writings carry a unique aspect. Ibn Arabi says about the Futuhat Mekkiyah the following: I am the receiver of intuitions. Prophets got the revelations, the wahi. First, I was to read, and then I was able to write by ilka'i rabbani wa imla'i ilahi. So what does this last sentence mean? He was actually saying that his work, Futuhat Mekkiyah, was not mere creations of his mind, but rather divine inspirations granted to him by God, by Allah. And these inspirations and connections with Allah he made came to him during his tawaf, circumambulation around the Kaaba, and also moments of reflection, muraqaba, as we said in the beginning, during the area around the Al-Kaaba. He explains us in detail how he assembled Futuhat Mekkiyah, but what we can understand from his sayings is that Futuhat Mekkiyah is just a mere summary of all the divine knowledge and insights he gained. He was able to write only a fraction of experiences in order to not lose them. The 37 volumes of his work were actually a fraction what he was actually experiencing. So let me kind of elaborate all of this. Why philosophers and scientists typically rely on observations to understand the world, Ibn Arabi and other Sufis take a different path. They use methods of perception that directly access the hidden aspects, aiming to connect with the ultimate reality. Ibn Arabi reminds us that observations are not error-proof due to the defects of inaccurate tools like human senses or technical gear. On the other side, philosophers and scientists are based on logic and experiments to shape their theories and clarify observations. Sufis, on the other hand, often describe their profound spiritual visions without being overly concerned with providing logical explanations. Sometimes these visions may seem strange at first glance, but they remain authentic. Therefore, Sufis like Ibn Arabi can swiftly and accurately gain insights into reality, even surpassing some philosophers in understanding. However, conveying these insights can be a challenge, and when they attempt to explain their profound experiences, their message might not resonate with everyone, simply because not everyone has walked the same path. He went to Damascus, Syria, and he went through his book, Futuhat al-Mekkiyya, and made some changes and adaptations, and finally rewrote Futuhat al-Mekkiyya 37 volumes with his own hands. And if you want to see the original, it is currently exhibited in Turkish and Islamic Art Museum at the Sultan Ahmed Square in Istanbul. But because I'm a very considerate person, I'll share it on Instagram for you. He stayed around 2.5 years in Mecca and then continued his travels to Baghdad, accompanied by some of his friends like Sadreddin Konavi's father, Muhyiddin Ishaq, and his close friends, of course, Abdullah Badr al-Habashi. So why am I mentioning these names? It has a reason. So while he was traveling also with his friends, he attended many lectures and scholars to benefit of their wisdom. At the same time, he was also writing his own works. During his travels with his friends, the Selçuklu Empire was dominant in Anatolia. To be more specific, the Sultan Gıyasettin Keyhüsrev I sat newly on the throne for the second time. The Sultan, old friends with Muhyiddin Ishaq, which is one of the companions of Ibn Arabi. So what did the Sultan do? He called on Muhyiddin Ishaq to mentor his own son, the prince. So because they were all together, Ibn Arabi thought, you know what, I'm gonna come too with you. So that was actually the first reason why Ibn Arabi came to Anatolia, and to be more specific, to Konya. Thank God he did. After he came to Anatolia, he didn't stop actually traveling. He still continued to go to other countries and other cities like Aleppo, Qudus, Mecca again. He went to Baghdad and then he came back to Konya. In Konya, he became close with the Sultan's son, Izzeddin Keykubat. He considered the prince as his own spiritual son. He mentored and supported him during hard times. So the son of the Sultan became the Sultan after his father passed away. During all these times, Ibn Arabi was always supporting the Selçuklu Empire. And not only the Selçuklu Empire actually. His intelligence, foresight made him also a consultant to Ayyubis in Aleppo and Damascus. After the Selçuklu Empire, the Ottoman Empire was established. And still in the Ottoman Empire, his teachings were highly valuable. The Ottoman politicians say this about Ibn Arabi: "We were nursed by two mothers. One is Ibn Arabi and the second one is Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi." So during his lifetime, Ibn Arabi was really celebrated and embraced by everyone. But over time, leaders changed the understanding of Sufism, Tasawwuf, and scholars started considering Ibn Arabi and his understandings as heretic. So what they did is, after Ibn Arabi died, they started neglecting his grave. It was prohibited to read and even touch his works, his books. Such weird times. So they neglected Ibn Arabi's grave, and over time it disappeared. But what's interesting is Ibn Arabi knew that all of these things would happen. So in one of his works, he foretold this event. He says, "When Sin shall enter Shin, the grave of Muhyiddin will appear." So when Sin, the Arabic letter Sin, shall enter Shin, the Arabic letter Shin, Muhyiddin's grave will appear. He was talking about his grave, but no one really understood what he meant by seen shall enter sheen. So after decades, when the Ottoman Empire was established, Sultan Selim came across this saying, when seen shall enter sheen, the grave of Muhyiddin will appear. And he immediately understood what Ibn Arabi was trying to say. So Sultan Selim asked to his team of scholars to gather all of the information to find the grave of the great Ibn Arabi. So, like a little side note, finding disappeared grave was a spiritual gift given by God to this saint. So that's why Sultan Selim was able to ask saints to find the grave of Ibn Arabi. They were able to find the grave of Ibn Arabi. So what Ibn Arabi was trying to say was, when Selim shall enter Sheen, Sham, aka Damascus, Muhyiddin's grave will appear. That was actually Ibn Arabi trying to say. About the death, there are many things said. Some reports said that Ibn Arabi's death was 100% natural, but there are also some sources saying that it was a tragic event. Let me tell you. One day, Ibn Arabi stood on a hill and addressed the Damascus inhabitants the following: "The God you worship lies under my feet." The inhabitants of Damascus, they were also Muslims. No one understood why Ibn Arabi was saying this to them. They even thought that Ibn Arabi was trying to offend God. So what did the inhabitants do? At that spot where Ibn Arabi said the sentence, "The God you worship lies under my feet," they killed him right there. So Sultan Selim asked his servants to go to the exact location where Ibn Arabi made this statement and asked them to dig that place. When the servants started to dig that place, they couldn't believe their eyes. They found gold where Ibn Arabi said the sentence, "The God you worship lies under my feet." So actually he was referring to the gold and not to God. He actually wanted to say, you are valuing gold more than God. You will even kill each other to get gold. So that is also another example how Ibn Arabi was misunderstood many times in his life. So what did Sultan Selim do? He took the gold and used it to maintain the grave and built even a meal center next to its grave so the visitors can get a meal after their visitation to the great Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi. How thoughtful is that? So Ibn Arabi has approximately 245 works. He says he tried to count them, but there are probably more. He can't remember everything. And when I say his works, don't think it's just a book. No, there are even works made from 37 volumes. And in his work, he mostly talks about ontology. That is related to the existence and the reasoning why humans exist, why the universe exists, how God exists. Philosophers that talk about ontology are considered higher up philosophers because the complexity of these topics. It's really interesting the way how he takes these complex concepts and explains it to us level by level. Very detailed. And that's why Ibn Arabi is also very special. But till this day, unfortunately, only 150 of his work could survive. So why should we talk about someone who died centuries ago? The topics that Ibn Arabi covered are not just topics specifically related to that time. No. The topics that Ibn Arabi covered were actually questions that humanity will always have. We will always talk about these topics. Why do we exist? How do we exist? How is the existence of the human towards the existence of God? On which level? Because I always had interest in Muslim scientists and philosophers in history, I know Ibn Arabi. But actually, I never got into detail who he was and what his teachings are. In the past, Ibn Arabi's teachings were only taught to persons who had gained a particular baggage in important teachings in Quran, Hadith, Kalam, and such. Without this background, it was not permitted to read and learn Ibn Arabi. And Ibn Arabi was also someone who got so many critics in his life, and some of the critics were even accusing him of being a heretic. And according to academics and researchers, this is 100% normal. Someone like Ibn Arabi, if he didn't got any critics, that would mean that his views are average, basic. that he's not impressive at all. So with all of this information, I told I will not let my doubts control, not really focus on whether or not I will understand his high-level teachings, because I know no one ever can, 100%. So this helped me at least to take an attempt to learn about his life and try to understand his teachings. So what Ibn Arabi does in his work is trying to find the link between the existence of God and everything else. Whatever he explains us, he always shows us the link between the existence and the manifestation of it. He has many ideas about the perfect human, which I'm planning a separate episode about it, hopefully in the future. I really loved this episode and I really loved learning about Ibn Arabi, and hopefully you did also learn together with me about him. So if you got any value from this episode, please consider to follow on whatever platform you're listening from, but also follow me on Instagram to get updates sometimes, or just if you want to say hi to me on Instagram. In any case, next week, I'll be back with more thinking work to do. Salama.